Hello and welcome everyone to the monthly Northwood University alumni webinar series. My name is Julia Damchek and I'm excited to welcome all of you today to this webinar. We're so happy that so many of you find our webinars valuable. And of course, I'm also excited to welcome our presenter today, Associate Academic Dean and Professor at DeVos Graduate School, Dr. Todd Thomas. Before we get into Dr. Thomas's 20-minute presentation, I would like to remind everyone that we will have time at the end for some Q&A. Please type your questions into the Q&A chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. We're also recording the webinar. We will email that out to you following the event along with a survey and a copy of the slides. Today our topic is building trust with employees during the Great Realization. Dr. Thomas will discuss the importance of having a surplus of trust in challenging environments. The global pandemic, in addition to a variety of other factors, has led employees to think critically about their work-life balance and overall happiness with their current employer. Join us today for an intentional look at how trust contributes to organizational stability and receive some actionable tips on how to create a culture of trust, whether that be in person or virtually. Without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Todd Thomas.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for all of you who have taken the time to join us this afternoon. This is both an interesting and I believe important topic that has a unique context, and we're going to jump right into it. I don't need to tell you that the pandemic has created a much different environment, but as it relates to the workforce and as it relates to the workplace, one of the things that we have to take into consideration is how quickly things change. So where there may have been a move in some organizations to consider remote work or to consider flexibility more in the job, suddenly with the shutdowns and other things that were going on, this became a reality. As a result, one of the things that our workforces and those who work for us and follow us discovered was first that remote work is actually possible. Now, in some cases, this isn't true, of course, and actually we'll get to that in just a second. But for a lot of jobs that had considered whether remote work and perhaps had either forbidden it or had required, a lot of approvals to do it, now the workforce is working from home and suddenly understanding that, yes, we can actually do that. Flexibility in my job is possible. A lot of people discovered that they actually could schedule time to do their homeschooling and still be able to get their work done by just simply having flexible hours and having a few hours here, a few hours there. But unfortunately, along the way, a lot of employees also discovered that their loyalty, and this is their loyalty to their job, their leader, their organization, may not be reciprocated. Now, by this, I don't necessarily mean that the organization, the leader, or the company had no loyalty toward the employee. But if you are suddenly laid off, if you are not receiving, any kind of income, or if you're being called into work into situations that are very stressful and busy, it will feel like the best interest of the organization may be different than the best interest of the individual. And so for a lot of people, for thousands of people, well, that's an understatement, for tens of thousands, this was the experience of the pandemic. Which leads us then to what I'm calling the Great Realization. And the Great Realization is that the workplace I knew before March of 2020 may not have to be the workplace that I know now. Now, one of the things that we have to remember is that along with this great realization is an environment where more information is available than ever for job opportunities. So people can get online, they have access to jobs much more than they did a few years ago. And because of the evolution of some of this work, there are more remote work possibilities, which then means that I may be able to leave working for you and work for someone else and still be able to live in my community, let my children go to their schools and so forth. Another thing that the pandemic period did for a lot of us and for a lot of the employees and workers that we're talking about was it made us a lot more aware of our values. Suddenly, we're at home for long periods of time. We have the opportunity to spend time with our children during the day that we had not had before. We have time to, to do the things with our, at least our immediate family, that perhaps we hadn't taken the time to do before. And we start to think about what's important to me. And perhaps, although it's always been important to me, I become more aware of it. And as I look around, realize that I have more choices than I may have thought I had in the general sort of routine and approach to my normal work. So it's not surprising that as this experience happened, that it began what many are calling the Great Resignation. Now, it's important to remember that this trend did not start with the pandemic. It was already starting, but it was starting much slower. And the numbers that we're looking at are amazing. Some would say staggering. I tried to get as current a numbers as I could. So in the second quarter of 2021, 11.5 million Americans resigned from their jobs. By July, there were an additional 8.4 million potential workers who were unemployed, even though there were over 10 million jobs that were open, almost 11 million. So when you look at this situation and you look at the organizations that have these jobs open, and if you use the conservative estimate that to replace somebody in a position, depending on where the level of the position is, could cost 10, 12, 18% in addition to the salary. What you end up with is a situation just with these numbers through quarter two of nearly a $200 billion negative impact to business if only 80% of those jobs are filled. So that's from the employee perspective. From the leader perspective, and by the way, this is an interesting topic to discuss because if you're a leader or a manager, you are also an employee. So you're experiencing multiple things at once. But for leaders, the thought is that the workplace I knew before March 2020 is no longer the place I am in now. It has changed, and whether you would like it to have changed or not, it has, and it continues to. So flexibility now means fitting work and life together, not just working from home. And if you think back prior to March 2020, often when HR departments or organizations created flexible work schemes of some sort, they had to do with when you had to be in the office and when you could work from home. And there are a lot of other things about flexibility that are not specifically related to that. A second thing leaders need to understand is that burnout is real and employees have their limits. As many of you know and many of you experience, during this time of shutdown and the stress of moving a lot of work to video and conferencing and all of these things, that we also didn't have the separation that we were accustomed to from our office to our home. And most of us had to make sure that we had an office set up at home since that's where our work was happening. What we did not do, because it happened so quickly, is to really think about how this setup could best work. And so for a lot of people, they worked much more than they had before, putting in longer hours in a stressful environment. And burnout is today one of the biggest issues in organizations. Also, leaders discovered that money's not the answer. That money is an answer to inconvenience and to filling job positions, but it's not really an answer. It's not a long-term answer, and we just can't compete. Most companies can't continue to compete on money as the only way to keep our employees. Many leaders discovered that if they lose the communication, they lose the community. And by that, I mean that teams began to maybe unravel, but at the very least become less intimate because they were spending less time in communication with each other. And an important part of this is when the rules start to change, trust starts to be tested. I start to wonder when you're communicating to me about my work schedule and all of this, if you're saying the same things to everybody else. When things become particularly inconvenient, I start to wonder where this is coming from. And because I don't have all of the data that I had prior to this, I began to really struggle with trusting my leadership and my workplace. And so leaders began to pick up the fact that your priorities and your work is not my life. Happening at the same time that I am being reaffirmed that my life is not your work. So I did some research on why then do employees stay, because we talk a lot about why employees leave. If you look at the research around why employees stay, it comes down to 4 pretty basic areas. These can be extended, but these are the 4 biggest ones. First, I stay here because I'm recognized and I'm respected. So I fit into this organization in a way that's similar to how I see myself. My contribution is recognized. People respect what I do. I respect people around me. It is a great place. And if I leave here, then neither of those 2 things are going to continue to be the case for some period of time. The second reason I stay is because I trust the people around me and they trust me. And as we'll mention here in a couple of minutes, trust is reciprocal. And if I feel that it goes both ways, then it's difficult for me to leave because, again, trust takes a while to establish, and I may not want to go through that. It may be that I am emotionally connected to my work and my team. I feel good about the people I work with and the work that we do. And then finally, my contribution makes a difference. This is different than being recognized. This is me knowing that my contribution would be missed if I wasn't making it. And it's very hard to leave an organization and team when I feel that way. All of these ideas being based on the concept of trust. So let's talk for a minute about what I call intentional trust. Trusting cultures and non-trusting cultures are going to be created whether you are intentional about it or whether you're not. So the culture that you work in, your team, the relationship of trust between you and your team, whether you spend time focused on that or whether you don't, trust is going to be an element. Another thing as a leader that you really need to keep in mind is that you don't decide if you are trusted. Other people decide if they trust you. And it doesn't matter how many times you tell people that they can trust you. It is their decision to make. And they don't make it by the language that's used. They make it by the observations. All of us do this. We may initially trust somebody until they prove that they can't be trusted. We may be one of those who don't trust somebody until they prove they can be trusted. But in either case, the proof comes from what they do, not from what they say. And it is always a personal relational element. That means that we should deal with it before we actually need it. This should be a priority. Now, for my little academic moment, this is one of my favorite formulas to throw up there because it is related to what is then trust or trustworthiness. And the formula is that what credibility, so, my expertise, how upfront I am, plus the actions, plus the reliability, how consistent that I am. Intimacy is the personal and relational aspect, divided by my self-orientation, which is the degree to which you focus on your own concerns when interacting with others. Now, the value of this formula is not to actually stick numerical values in there, but it is to look at it from a broader picture. If the numerator of that fraction, if the number on top is very high and the number on the bottom, meaning that I am oriented toward you quite a bit, is very low, then I'm pretty trustworthy. But if for some reason that top number is low, either because of credibility, reliability, or connection with other people, and my focus on myself is pretty high, then my trustworthiness is fairly low. So this may just be entertaining to me and not anybody else, but I thought I'd throw it up there. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about building trust intentionally. And I'm going to be pretty direct about this because we don't have much time. And lots of times when we're talking about something like this, we kind of dance around the edges. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit. And I'm going to start with checking your own mindset. So a lot of the conversation that's going on right now is how do we keep people from quitting? I would suggest that the question should be, how do we earn people's lasting trust and loyalty? Because we know if we have their trust and loyalty, it is a more embedded situation. It's harder for them to leave, and retention is actually higher. We sometimes believe that employees will go where they get the best offer. Again, another thought process is that employees are telling us exactly what they need, and we should pay attention. We should change. We should consider changes that match those needs. And then finally, there's a belief that this is a difficult moment, but things will eventually get back to normal. I would suggest that this is a paradigm shift. This is a different awareness. And right now is the chance for you to make the adjustments that you need for long-term retention going forward. So to do this, first, you need to be honest with yourself. Are you trustworthy? Do you have credibility? Are you reliable? Are you consistent? A second one that's really important is, do you actually trust your employees? For real, do you trust your employees? And a tough question, but worth reflecting on, is if you knew more about the desires and priorities of those that work for you, would you care? Would it matter? Now, you don't have to answer these questions out loud. In fact, you shouldn't. You should think about them internally. But my observation here is if the answer is actually no for any of these, then that's where you need to start. You need to start figuring out, how do you become more trustworthy? What do you need to know to trust your employees? And how do you build those relationships? I will say, before going to the next slide, that if you attempt to build a culture of trust through the actions that you think will do so, when actually the answer is no to one or all of these questions, it is almost guaranteed to be a failure. We are aware when people are being authentic and when they're being disingenuous. So how do you create an environment that's difficult to leave? I'm going to reference some work done by Daniel Pink. I will recommend his book Drive, which has been out for 10 years, but it's a great book. And it comes down to, how do you make it tough? And I don't mean in a negative way. How do you make it so that I want to stay and work for you? Well, one thing is you give me autonomy, because I need the ability to direct my own life and work. How do you do that? Well, you could look at, what are the current controls? So how tightly are you controlling office hours, and is that actually necessary? Is there a strict dress code? Is that actually necessary? Are you the person that assigns the projects, or could the team be involved in that? Any place that I can find to give you the ability to direct your work makes it this idea of autonomy feel even stronger. Mastery is the second area, which is my desire to improve and do my best in something that I think is important. So in your organization or your acts as leaders, do you develop the development plan and share it with the employee? Or do the two of you sit down and not just talk about the development activities, but how they fit into the goals and direction of the employee? And then finally, the third thing that keeps me around is the feeling that I contribute to a larger purpose. Now, this doesn't have to be an earth-changing kind of a purpose. It might be that the purpose I contribute to is the production of the product that we make, but helping me understand that I am an important piece of this, that you would miss me if I weren't doing my part. Really makes a difference in how engaged and connected that I feel. So there are some things that you can start today. And I would suggest that these may not be as easy as they look. I would suggest that you not go back this afternoon and try to start all of them. Otherwise, your employees will think that you had a couple too many cocktails over lunch. But choose one or two that you may not be doing as much as you would like. And one of those is to set aside the time to listen to your employees. And by this, I mean not just collectively, but individually. Ask people how they're doing. Ask it in team meetings, but ask them when you're around them. Ask them what you could do to make their job easier. Just connect. Connection builds trust from the beginning. The second thing is pay attention to what's going on around you. Are people hesitant to talk to you? Do they switch into this very formal, rigid kind of mode? Another clue sometimes is, do they apologize for being an imposition on your time? Now, we all know like one or two individuals that do this by habit, but if you notice that a lot of people do this, then it might be that you're giving a signal that your time is more important. And as a result, they feel the need to apologize. So pay attention to that. A third thing is to treat your employees like humans as opposed to workers. This is another speech, another day. I have a problem with the phrase, our employees are our greatest asset. And the reason I have a problem with that is what we actually do with assets. The value of assets drops over time. Assets are actually a cost, and keeping them around can be expensive. I would suggest that your employees are humans, that they are a part of your organization, and they should be treated that way. Sometimes that means trying to get feedback about how they want to be treated, but it means not minimizing the issues they bring to you, even if they are not issues that you yourself suffer. The next to last is to tell the truth and admit mistakes. If you can take transparency to a certain level, take it. Obviously, leaders and managers sometimes cannot be transparent about every tiny detail, but the more you can share, the better. And then finally, trust your employees. Again, if you find that there are some or all that you don't trust, then go back and try to figure out why you don't trust them and then deal with that. If it is that you need to give them an opportunity, then do that. If it is an issue where there's a cause, then deal with it, because the lack of trust in your team is going to cause an issue and could create an environment where I'm willing to pack up and move on. So, I think that was my version of 20 minutes anyway. Looks like there are questions and those types of things. So, Julie, I'm going to ask you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm back. All right. Thank you, Dr. Todd. And yes, we've got a few questions already. Just a reminder to type them into the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen. First, Diana mentioned, does the 11.5 million resignations account for layoffs? And I think our fellow colleague here at Northwood, Beth Bryce, did answer those questions, that question for Diana.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the 11.5 I was talking about, they quit. The 8.1 chose not to continue their job search. Beth is absolutely right that over half of the population was under 30, and there's a large percentage of the population that were women. All of these things are interesting for us to look further into and understand.
Thank you. Kirk is asking, the work from home capable employee is only one portion of the population. Can you address the roles that cannot work from home, such as manufacturing employees?
Yes. So working from home, as you said, working from home is part of it. One of the things that during the pandemic period that really impacted the way people see the relationship with each other was what happened in a manufacturing environment, what happened under the idea of essential workers versus non-essential workers and all of this, where as a manager, you still need to pay attention to all of the rest. So in manufacturing environments, for example, and in some retail environments, this idea that my employees now were workers, not humans, really became a big issue for some. They, were saying, hey, I have a particular situation, but their individual situation wasn't being addressed because there was this broader, kind of activity going on. Even if you take the flexibility out and you say that these workers did not work in an environment that itself was flexible, they also live in an environment where they saw many other people in a flexible environment. So I would still suggest that it's important to help people figure out what this relationship should be. Again, by connecting, by getting to know their concerns, and by really taking the time intentionally to make sure that the relationship between you as the manager and your team is as strong as it can be.
Thank you. All right, next question. Tara says, my company hasn't given raises in 2020 nor 2021. They haven't reinstated 401 matches. How long should employees hold out for that to improve? And how transparent do you think they should be with this?
Yeah, that's tough, Tara. I think that it's tough, and it's going to sound like I'm avoiding your question, but it's hard to answer exactly without knowing all of the circumstances of the specific company. I suspect that one area that might be, I don't want to say excusable because it's your raise and it's your 401k, is that between the supply chain issues and the various market issues over the last year and a half, it could be that your company is actually struggling from a profitability standpoint. Now, let's say that that's not the case, that your company is actually doing pretty well and has recovered and has its full numbers back and all of that. Then my personal opinion is that organizations should be looking at this sooner rather than later. This is part of my thing about looking at employees as humans rather than workers, because if you look at it from a process standpoint, we'll get back to the 401k eventually. If I look at it from the human standpoint, then I'm saying there are people like Tara out there who have had a pretty rough time of it over the last year or so as well, not just professionally and personally, could really use that match. So let's get it back. I don't know a good answer for how long employees should hold out for it, but I do think it's a legitimate question, and I think it's worth bringing up and trying to find out, what else is going on.
Thank you. All right, Molly is asking what percentage of people that are resigning are immediately getting jobs at new companies versus taking a break from working?
Well, I don't know the exact answer to that. I do know that one of the things that is most interesting to me about that is that people are not frantically leaving a job and applying for another one. They are, in many cases, leaving a job and at the very least taking a period of time before they apply to another one, which is why you end up with 10, almost 11 million jobs open by the end of July, where jobs are everywhere. Now, we could get into a really interesting discussion at some point about what kind of jobs those are, but I'm afraid I don't know that specific answer. But I'm going to do what I do with my class sometimes and say, wow, that was a good question. But I'm afraid I don't want to make up an answer here while we're talking.
All right, we've got time for 2 more questions here. First, any insights for hospital healthcare issues related to trust, retention, burnout?
So I'm sorry, could you ask me that again?
Sure. Do you have any insights for the hospital healthcare issues related to trust, retention, and burnout?
The best that I have, and Beth Bryce, who I saw was on here, may actually know this better than me, but SHRM has, the Society for Human Resource Management, has been doing quite a bit of research in this, and all I can tell you is that it is high, that there's urgency, or one of the things that is happening for businesses and organizations is they're being encouraged to pay more attention to the mental and psychological needs of their employees. And this might be because of burnout. It could also be because of personal struggles with family members who have gone through a tough time or themselves gone through a tough time. I don't really know the actual numbers, but I am sure, I know there's a push for us to pay more attention, so that, that sort of help we can also make sure is provided.
All right. Last question from Wayne. When trying to understand why members leave our company, it seems our HR department doesn't think it's necessary to consider those who are retiring because they are predictable based on age or time with the company, etc. I think they should at least try to understand those who are retiring early. Your thoughts?
I would agree, Wayne. I would say that retiring early is simply one channel by which I can leave my job. And I think that it is worth taking the time to figure out. And perhaps, the volume of people could be great. It might be that data is not really being looked at because there's so much other data. But I suspect that it's what you said, that if I look at retirements, I know retirement numbers are not sometimes counted in some of the national statistics that we see. But I would agree with you. I think especially early retirements, a conversation that, allowed us to have some sense of what was leading to the retirement at that moment would certainly be helpful and valuable.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks to Dr. Todd Thomas for providing us with all of your insight. Um, if you enjoyed our webinar today and you want to hear from more from Dr. Thomas or some awesome faculty just like him at the DeVos Graduate School, I encourage you to check out devos.northwood.edu, and there's a slide with all of the different programs we now offer at our graduate school, so check that out. And again, remember to watch your inbox for an email from us. It'll include a survey, so we would like your feedback regarding our webinar. You'll also get a recording and a copy of the slides. And lastly, let me thank Beth Bryce. Again, Beth works with us here at Northwood too, and you'll notice her in the Q&A in our Career Advancement Department. And thank you to Beth for helping answer some of our questions today too. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.